Hello, and welcome to the Spicy Pod Sleep Stories. I am Michael, and tonight we will step into a world where two fierce heirs are bound by a marriage of convenience. But beneath the surface, tension sparks into stolen kisses, secret dances, and a slow burning desire that neither expected. This is a story of tradition, rivalry, and a love that ignites when the walls come down. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of room built for serious, uncomfortable conversations. A single long table divided the space like a battlefield, and on opposite ends sat the two people who had spent years despising each other. Adrian Blackwell, cool and infuriatingly composed in his tailored charcoal suit, and Lila Marchand, whose posture was a masterclass in polite defiance. They didn't look at each other. Not at first, because looking meant remembering the charity gala where they'd exchanged insults so sharply the press had picked it up, the ruthless bid-in war over a historic property, the whispered remarks passed at every social event. The lawyer, a gray-haired man with the patience of a saint, cleared his throat and began reading the will of the late Charles Belmont, their mutual benefactor. Belmont had been Adrian's godfather and Lila's late mother's closest friend. The man had trusted them both, though neither could understand why. The legal phrasing droned on until the sentence that sliced through the air like a blade. The Belmont estate and controlling shares of the company shall be awarded jointly to Mr. Adrian Blackwell and Ms. Lila Marchand, upon the condition that they marry each other within 30 days and reside together at the Belmont estate for a full month. Silence. Lila's head snapped toward Adrian, eyes narrowing, like she'd just been told the universe had played a particularly cruel joke. You have got to be kidding me. Adrian leaned back in his chair, slow and deliberate, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Apparently your charms impressed him so much he thought I'd enjoy them permanently. She laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. Permanent. Please, this is nothing but a formality. We marry, survive the month, split the inheritance, and never have to see each other again. His gaze sharpened, just enough to make the air between them feel heavier. You really think it'll be that easy? I know it will, she shot back. The lawyer coughed politely, sliding two documents across the table. Marriage contracts waiting for signatures. I suggest you both consider the financial and emotional implications. Neither moved to sign. Lila glanced at Adrian, catching the way his hand rested lazily against the pen, not reaching for it, not rushing, like he was already strategizing. She knew that look. He wasn't going to play fair. Adrian finally picked up the pen, twirling it between his fingers. Fine. We'll do it your way, Marchand. Just don't be surprised when you lose. She leaned forward, close enough that her perfume tangled with the scent of his cologne, and smiled sweetly, dangerously. "Oh, Blackwell, I never lose." When they signed, the scratch of ink on paper sounded like the first shot fired in a wars. Neither of them intended to surrender. The Belmont estate appeared on the horizon like something out of a painting. Stone walls weathered by time, ivy climbing toward high windows, and sprawling lawns that seemed designed for the kind of peace neither of them had ever known in each other's company. The car ride there had been silent save for the low hum of the engine. Adrian had claimed the window seat as if it were a throne, scrolling through something on his phone with the casual detachment of a man who refused to acknowledge the storm brewing beside him. Lila had spent most of it glaring at the passing countryside, determined not to be the first to speak. When the driver opened the grand front doors, the smell of polished wood and faint lavender greeted them. A small, welcoming party of household staff stood waiting. At their head was Mrs. Hargreaves, the housekeeper, sharp-eyed, brisk, and clearly entertained by whatever gossip she had already gathered. Mrs. Hargreaves greeted them at the door, her eyes sharp with curiosity and amusement. "Welcome to Belmont, Mr. Blackwell, Ms. Marchand. I'll be at your service during your stay." The two heirs exchanged a glance, neither offering a word. As they crossed the threshold, the heavy door closing behind them seemed to seal away the world, and with it, their carefully maintained animosity. Inside, the estate was a museum of grandeur, velvet drapes, ornate chandeliers, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors watching their every move. The air smelled faintly of lavender and polished oak, a mix of comfort and cold formality. Mrs. Hargreaves led them through long hallways and past rooms that whispered of countless family gatherings and whispered betrayals. She paused briefly by a grand staircase and gestured to the second floor. "For now, you'll both be settled here. The rooms have been prepared. Dinner will be served in the dining hall at 7. I suggest you get acquainted with the house and each other in the meantime." Adrian's gaze flickered toward Lila, an unreadable expression in his eyes. She met it with a steady look of her own, refusing to be the first to speak. As Mrs. Hargreaves stepped away, the estate suddenly felt impossibly vast, and yet, somehow, unbearably small. Lila let out a slow breath and surveyed the grand hall. "So this is home for the next month." Adrian's smirk was slow, deliberate. A month of peace and prosperity or war. Time will tell. The weight of the unspoken challenge hung between them, thicker than any family legacy. Dinner was a careful affair. The dining room, all gold trim and heavy chandeliers, could easily have seated 30, but the staff had prepared a small table in the center, just large enough that Lila and Adrian could look at each other without raising their voices, but not large enough to avoid eye contact entirely. They had spent most of the meal exchanging silent commentary in the form of arched brows and faint smirks, neither willing to break the surface with actual conversation. It wasn't until dessert, some delicate custard Lila didn't even want, that Mrs. Hargreaves cleared her throat and said, "I've had the bedroom prepared as usual for newlyweds. If you'll follow me after your coffee, I'll show you." Lila set her spoon down slowly. "I'm sorry. The bedroom?" "Yes," Mrs. Hargreaves replied without missing a beat. "The master suite. It's tradition for the married couple to share it for the first month." Mr. Belmont was quite insistent about preserving tradition in his will. Across the table, Adrian's lips curved just enough to be irritating. Tradition marchand. Who are we to argue with the dearly departed? "I'm sure the dearly departed wouldn't want me committing a crime in his house," she muttered. The walk up the sweeping staircase felt like some kind of silent duel. Mrs. Hargreaves kept up a polite stream of commentary about the estate's history, but Lila caught the flicker of amusement in her eyes. The master suite was as grand as it was infuriating. A vaulted ceiling with gilded trim, a marble fireplace at the far wall, and a carved four-poster bed large enough to be mistaken for a small stage. Pillows arranged like the cover of a magazine. Creamy linens aglow in soft light. "Only one bed?" Lila asked flatly. "It is rather difficult to fit two in here without spoiling the balance of the room," Mrs. Hargreaves said, clearly pleased with her answer. Lila crossed her arms, glancing at Adrian. "We could take turns. One sleeps here, one finds a guest room." Adrian stepped past her, tossing his bag onto the bench at the foot of the bed. "Or we could both be adults and use opposite sides. Or," she countered, "you could sleep on the floor." He laughed, a low, unhurried sound that seemed to curl around her ears. "And miss the chance to see you grumble your way through the month? Not a chance." Mrs. Hargreaves, sensing the conversation had reached a stalemate, excused herself. The moment the door closed, Lila pulled a decorative pillow and dropped it on the center of the bed like a barricade. "This stays here, you stay on your side. No exceptions." Adrian loosened his tie, clearly enjoying himself. "You think a pillow will stop me?" "It's not the pillow stopping you, Blackwell," she said, turning away to unpack. "It's me." Still, when the lights were out later, she could feel his presence across the bed, an awareness she couldn't shake. The house was silent save for the distant chime of a grandfather clock. And though neither moved, the space between them felt far too small. Somewhere deep in the house, an old clock chimed the hour, and in the quiet that followed, Lila realized this month was going to feel a lot longer than 30 days. The first morning in the estate began with the clatter of porcelain and the faint scent of coffee drifting up the staircase. Lila had hoped for at least a quiet breakfast before she had to deal with Adrian's voice. Unfortunately, fate Or perhaps the staff had other plans. When she stepped into the sunlit dining room, Adrian was already there, sleeves rolled back, sipping coffee like he owned the place. The table was set for two, an intimate little arrangement despite the long mahogany expanse. Before she could even sit, Mrs. Hargreaves appeared in the doorway, her tone brisk but eyes glinting with mischief. "An old family friend is stopping by this afternoon to congratulate you both. She'll be expecting newlywed warmth." Lila arched a brow. "And if she doesn't see it?" "Let's just say she has influence over certain shareholders," Mrs. Hargreaves replied, letting the implication hang. "You'll want to convince her the marriage is sincere." Adrian set his cup down, leaning back with the kind of calculated ease that made her teeth clench. "You hear that, Marchand? We'll need to hold hands and pretend to like each other." Lila crossed her arms. "I'd rather hold a venomous snake." "Luckily," he said, rising from his chair and crossing to her, "I've been told my charm is just as dangerous." He took her hand before she could stop him. His palm was warm, his grip firm, but not tight. She tried to pull back, but he only drew her closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur meant only for her. "Better start practicing now, unless you want her to see right through us." The air between them shifted, still barbed but charged. His thumb brushed along her knuckle, slow enough to feel deliberate. "This is ridiculous," she said, though the words came out softer than she intended. "Ridiculous," he agreed, his gaze lingering on her mouth. "Now smile, Marchand." She did, sharp-edged but convincing. And when the family friend arrived that afternoon, she and Adrian played their roles flawlessly. They laughed at each other's jokes, leaned in just a little too close, and when the older woman teased them about their chemistry, Adrian had the audacity to brush his lips against Lila's cheek. The kiss was light, barely there, but it sent an unwelcome ripple of heat down her spine. It was all for show, she told herself. It had to be. The invitation arrived on thick ivory cardstock, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell in curling gold script. Lila had to stop herself from tearing it in half. Mrs. Hargreaves delivered it with the same composed smile she wore when delivering bad news. "The annual Belmont Charity Ball is this weekend. Of course, the newlyweds are expected to open the first dance." Lila shot Adrian a glare across the breakfast table. "I don't dance with people who step on my toes." Adrian, infuriatingly unbothered, spread marmalade across his toast. "Good thing I'm not people." By the following afternoon, the grand hall was cleared, the polished floors gleaming like liquid amber under the afternoon light. A record player in the corner played a soft, steady waltz. Mrs. Hargreaves, clearly enjoying herself far too much, announced that practice was necessary. Adrian held out his hand. "Come on, Marchand. We don't want to embarrass ourselves in front of all those cameras, do we?" She stared at his hand, like it was a dangerous animal. You just want an excuse to boss me around. True, he said with the ghost of a smile, but this time it's for charity. Reluctantly, she placed her hand in his. His other hand settled at her waist, firm but not intrusive, and for a moment she was too aware of the heat radiating from him. They began to move, slow and deliberate, his steps guiding hers. "You're not terrible," she admitted under her breath. "High praise from you." His gaze caught hers, steady and searching, until she had to glance away. They moved in circles across the empty hall, the music wrapping around them like a secret. Somewhere between the turns, the mockery in his voice softened, and her grip on his shoulder no longer felt defensive. A misstep brought them closer than intended, her chest brushing his breath warm against her temple. Neither stepped back immediately. "Careful, Marchand," he murmured, his voice low enough to stir something she didn't want to name. "You might start enjoying this." She tilted her chin up, meeting his gaze head on. Not a chance. But when the song ended, neither moved to let go right away. The evening had been a dance of polite smiles and measured words, the annual Belmont Charity Ball, unfolding beneath glittering chandeliers, that scattered light like stars caught in crystal. The grand hall buzzed with soft classical music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered, especially between the newlyweds, Adrian Blackwell and Lila Marchand had spent the night circling each other like wary predators, careful not to reveal more than necessary while performing the charade of a perfect couple. It was a role they had reluctantly accepted, but neither could deny the strange electricity in the air whenever their eyes met. Outside, dark clouds thickened quickly, a storm rolling in with sudden urgency. The first low rumble of thunder went almost unnoticed by the guests, but soon enough the rain began to hammer the tall windows in heavy sheets, sending occasional shudders through the stone walls. Then, with a violent crack, the lights went out. The entire estate was plunged into darkness. The grand chandeliers ceased to sparkle, the soft music cut abruptly, and an uneasy hush fell over the crowd. Gasps and startled murmurs echoed through the space. Somewhere, emergency lights blinked weakly before fading, leaving the guests stranded in the blackness. Adrian's hand found Lila's without effort, fingers curling around hers like a lifeline. His voice was low, steady. "Stay close." Lila's breath hitched, not just because of the sudden darkness, but because of the closeness she suddenly felt between them. "I'm not exactly thrilled to be relying on you." A ghost of a grin played on his lips. "Lucky for you, I'm feeling generous tonight." They began moving cautiously, their steps tentative on the glossy floors they could no longer see. Every sound The rustle of silk gowns, the shuffle of polished shoes, seemed amplified in the stillness. The storm's fury pounded relentlessly outside, rattling the windows and vibrating through the walls. A sharp creak overhead made them freeze. Lila's heart surged, and before she could steady herself, her foot caught on the edge of a rug. She stumbled forward, and Adrian's arms were there instantly, steadying her against his chest. For a suspended moment, the world narrowed to the heat of his body against hers, his steady heartbeat beneath her ear, the faint scent of cedar, and something uniquely his filling her senses. "You're heavier than you look," he murmured with a teasing undertone. Lila's lips pressed into a thin line, though her voice was softer than she intended. "Don't push your luck." The space between them shrank imperceptibly, her cheek almost brushing against his collarbone. Neither moved away. Footsteps echoed nearby, and Mrs. Hargreaves' calm voice cut through the charged silence. "Candles are being brought. Please remain calm." Adrian finally loosened his grip and stepped back, but the electricity crackling between them refused to fade. A few minutes later, flickering candlelight cast wavering shadows across the grand hall. Guests huddled in small groups, murmuring reassurances, but Adrian and Lila found themselves alone by one of the large windows, watching the rain cascade down the glass. The intimacy of the moment was undeniable. Lila swallowed hard, the memory of his touch lingering in places she hadn't expected. Adrian's voice was quiet, rough, with something unspoken. Funny how a blackout can make everything feel so clear. She met his gaze, searching his eyes for the usual challenge or disdain, and found instead something softer, more vulnerable. "This isn't just about the storm," she said, voice low. "Is it?" "No," he admitted, "not anymore." The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the estate something new was stirring. A fragile truce born not from duty, but from the unexpected pull they both tried to deny. Neither spoke again for a long moment, letting the silence wrap around them like a whispered promise. As the night wore on, the storm outside slowly began to lose its fury, but the tension inside the room remained taut, electric and impossible to ignore. The storm had passed, but the weight it left behind lingered like a stubborn shadow. Sleep was elusive for both Adrian and Lila, their minds tangled in the aftermath of that charged night. Lila paced the length of the sitting room, the soft rustle of her footsteps the only sound in the vast space. The house felt quieter now, the echoes of laughter and music replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against her chest. Adrian entered without knocking, leaning against the doorway with arms crossed, his usual composure softened by exhaustion. "You're restless," he observed, voice low. "Not exactly surprised," she replied, pausing to meet his gaze. "After last night, how could I be?" He stepped inside, closing the distance between them until only a breath separated their bodies. That blackout, it did something. Lila swallowed, the memory of his touch both confusing and magnetic. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. Neither did I. His eyes searched hers, vulnerability flickering beneath the usual sharpness. This whole arrangement, it's a war neither of us wanted, but now... She hesitated, then nodded. Now it feels like something else entirely. Words so long kept in check spilled between them. Fears, frustrations, the weight of expectations that neither had voiced aloud. I hate that I'm even admitting this, Adrian confessed, running a hand through his hair. But I don't want this month to end. Lila's breath caught. Me neither. The barriers they had so carefully built began to crumble, replaced by a fragile understanding. That was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. For a moment, the room held only the sound of their breathing, steady and slow. Then, with a small, almost shy smile, Adrian reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Maybe we're not such enemies after all. Lila's smile was genuine this time. Maybe not. The night wrapped the estate in a deep, velvety quiet, broken only by the low crackle of the fire burning in the library's hearth. Outside, the wind whispered against the tall windows, but inside, the room felt warm, almost dangerously so. Lila sat on the edge of a plush velvet armchair, a glass of red wine cradled in her hand, its rich scent mingling with the faint aroma of cedar and leather. Across from her, Adrian lounged with an ease that made her pulse quicken, the flickering firelight catching the sharp planes of his face and the glint in his dark eyes. I never thought I'd find myself playing truth or dare with you, Adrian said, swirling the wine lazily in his glass, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Lila met his gaze, a playful spark lighting her own. And here I thought you were full of surprises. The game started innocently enough. Carefully chosen truths, light-hearted dares that forced them to reveal bits of themselves. Each round chipped away at the walls they'd so carefully built, their laughter growing softer, more genuine. Their bodies shifted closer with every passing moment, the space between them shrinking almost without conscious thought. Then came the moment that made Lila's breath catch. Adrian set his glass down deliberately, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stole the air from the room. I dare you, he murmured, voice low and husky, to kiss me, like you mean it. Her heart hammered wildly, the world narrowing until only him and the challenge existed. For a heartbeat she hesitated, then, with a surge of boldness she hadn't expected, she stood and closed the distance between them. Her fingers brushed lightly against his jaw as she leaned in, the heat of his skin warming her fingertips. The first touch of their lips was slow and tentative, soft, like a question whispered in the dark. But it didn't stay gentle for long. Adrian's hand curved around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, growing bolder, a mix of hunger and restraint. His lips moved against hers with a teasing urgency, coaxing and demanding at once. She responded in kind, her own hands tangling in the dark hair at the nape of his neck, feeling the rapid thump of his pulse beneath her touch. Every brush of tongue, every sigh caught between parted lips, sent heat spiraling through her veins. The world outside the library ceased to exist. The storm's fury, the inheritance, the forced marriage, all forgotten in the intimate rhythm of their connection. When they finally parted, breaths heavy and hearts pounding, their foreheads rested together, sharing the same warm, dizzying space. Adrian's voice was rough with desire, a low whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "So, what do we do now?" Lila's lips curved into a slow, mischievous smile, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of challenge and promise. "We see where this goes." The fire crackled between them, but it was the spark in their eyes that truly ignited the room. The sun filtered softly through the tall windows of the estate's breakfast room, casting warm golden patches across the polished table. The house was still quiet in the early morning hours, but the air between Lila and Adrian was anything but peaceful. They sat across from each other, plates mostly untouched as the silence stretched, filled with the unspoken words neither dared to voice. The carefully rehearsed lines of convenience and rivalry had begun to unravel, replaced by something far more complex. Adrian's eyes caught Lila's from across the table, his gaze softer than she had ever seen. It made her pulse quicken in a way she tried desperately to ignore. She busied herself with her napkin, willing her cheeks to cool. "So," Adrian began, his voice low but steady, "how's the guest room treating you?" The attempt at a teasing tone failed to mask the underlying question. Lila's eyes lifted, meeting his with a mixture of challenge and vulnerability. "Better than I expected." She paused. "Better than I wanted it to." He leaned back, fingers tapping lightly against his coffee cup. Funny how a month of pretending can start to feel less pretend. The words hung between them, fragile and heavy. Lila swallowed, suddenly aware of how close the boundary between their act and reality had become. Later that day, they wandered the estate's sprawling gardens, the late afternoon sun warming their skin. The world outside seemed impossibly distant, the usual tension between them softened by the golden light and quiet beauty surrounding them. Adrian reached out, almost hesitantly, his hand brushing hers. Lila's breath caught, and instead of pulling away as she usually did, she let her fingers intertwine with his. "It feels strange," Adrian said, voice low. "How something meant to be temporary can start to feel like everything." Lila looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for truth. "I don't know." when it happened, she admitted softly, but it did. It's no longer just pretending. He smiled, a slow, genuine curve of lips that reached his eyes. Neither of us wanted this. Neither of us planned for it. Yet here we are, she whispered. The air between them shimmered with new possibilities, fragile yet powerful. Their connection was no longer a strategy or a game. It was something raw and real, waiting to be explored. But with that truth came a new kind of fear, the uncertainty of what came next. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden path, Adrian pulled Lila gently toward him. Their lips met in a kiss that was no longer tentative, but full of promise and longing. When they finally broke apart, breath mingling, Adrian murmured, "So, what happens now?" Lila smiled, heart pounding with hope and fear. "We find out together." The dawn broke gently over the Belmont estate, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold. The quiet morning felt different somehow, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift, to settle. Lila stood by the tall windows of the sitting room, watching the first light ripple across the gardens, where the storm from a few nights ago had left the earth damp and fresh. Her thoughts drifted, memories from the past weeks swirling through her mind. The harsh words, the stolen moments, the growing warmth she had fought so hard to deny. Adrian's voice broke through the silence, low and steady behind her. "You look like you're waiting for a sign." She turned, meeting his gaze. For the first time since their arrangement began, there was no wariness in his eyes, just something softer. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of trust. "I think I've been waiting for myself," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until it felt as though the rest of the world had faded away. "We've both come a long way," he said. "I'm not the man who walked into this estate a month ago, and neither are you." Her heart quickened. "No, we're not." The weight of unspoken words settled around them, but neither rushed to fill the space. Instead, they simply stood there, two people who had begun as enemies, forced together by circumstance, now something infinitely more. Adrian reached out, his fingers tracing a gentle line along her cheek. "I never thought this would happen. That I'd want more than just a contract, more than a fleeting truce." Lila's breath caught at his touch, warmth blooming deep inside her. "Neither did I," she confessed, "but I want to try, with you." A slow smile curved his lips. "Then we make our own rules?" She laughed softly, the sound a balm after weeks of tension and uncertainty. "No more traditions to trap us, only the ones we choose to keep," he said, his voice low and filled with promise. The morning light spilled around them, bathing the room in a gentle glow. as they took a tentative step closer, closer than ever before, their lips in a kiss that was no longer about pretense or hesitation, but a celebration of something real. It was slow and tender, full of the promises they dared to hope for. Their hands found each other with certainty, fingers weaving together like threads binding two separate lives into one. When they finally parted, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "This is just the beginning." Lila smiled, feeling the truth of those words in every beat of her heart. The beginning of us. Days later, the terms of the will were finalized. The estate, once a battlefield of wills and grudges, now felt like home because they had made it one. They faced the future together, not as reluctant partners forced by obligation, but as two people who had found unexpected love amidst the chaos. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the gardens, Lila and Adrian stood side by side, ready to write the next chapter together. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's story. Good night and sweet dreams.